At the turn of the century, Argentina was the land of opportunity. A booming economy, streets lined with European-style mansions, and waves of immigrants dreaming of a better life. But behind the glamour, a cycle of political chaos, coups, and economic crises was already taking shape. How did a country with such promise endure decades of turmoil, dictatorship, and mass movements? Join me as we unravel the dramatic political history of Argentina, from independence to Perón, from the dirty war to modern struggles, and discover why this nation's story is as turbulent as it is fascinating.
At the turn of the 20th century, Argentina stood on the brink of greatness. A nation bursting with new wealth, fueled by booming exports, crowded ports, and a flood of immigrants from across Europe who saw the Rio de la Plata as a gateway to a better life. Buenos Aires dazzled visitors with its grand avenues, opera houses, and mansions that earned it the nickname the Paris of the South. To many, it seemed obvious. Argentina was destined to become one of the world's most prosperous powers. And yet, that isn't how the story turned out. Instead of steady growth, Argentina would experience a familiar and exhausting pattern. Cycles of boom and bust, prosperity followed by disaster, democracy followed by dictatorship, hope followed by disillusion. But how did this happen? Why did a country that had everything going for it become one of the most unpredictable political landscapes in modern history? And how did its politics become shaped by charismatic leaders, military coups, populist movements, and deep divisions that still echo today? To understand the political history of Argentina, a history filled with revolutions, caudillos, workers' movements, suppressed voices, disappeared people, and traumatic comebacks, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when the Spanish Empire was collapsing, identities were shifting, and a group of patriots in Buenos Aires decided to take their fate into their own hands. Join me in this deep chronological explainer as we trace the remarkable, turbulent political history of Argentina, from the early independence struggles to Peronism, dictatorship, economic crises, and the ever-changing landscape of Argentine democracy.
Early independence and the birth of a fractured nation. Argentina's political story truly begins in the early 19th century, at a time when empires were crumbling and new identities were being forged across Latin America.
1808. The world watched as the Spanish monarchy collapsed
under Napoleon's invasion. With Ferdinand VII effectively removed from power and Joseph Bonaparte placed on the throne, the colonies of the Americas were thrown into political ambiguity. Who, exactly, were they supposed to obey? In the Rio de la Plata region, the answer came swiftly. On May 25, 1810, Buenos Aires leaders launched what they called the May Revolution. They expelled the viceroy, who governed in the name of Spain, Baltasar Hidalgo de Cisneros, and replaced him with a local governing junta. In theory, this new government still ruled on behalf of the legitimate king, Ferdinand VII. But in reality, this was the beginning of a long process that would lead to independence. It wasn't a coincidence that Buenos Aires moved first. A few years earlier, the city had successfully repelled the British invasion, 1807, while the Spanish authorities fled or hesitated. The people of Buenos Aires had proven to themselves and to each other that they could defend their territory without Spain. Local pride surged, and frustration with Spanish trade restrictions only deepened the desire to break free. However, the leaders of Buenos Aires immediately ran into a political problem. They claimed authority over the entire viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, a vast region that would later become the separate nations of Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. But these territories didn't all agree that Buenos Aires had the right to rule them. Many supported independence from Spain, but not subordination to the porteño elite. And so Argentina's road to independence was far from straightforward. The conflict dragged on for years. The frontier territories splintered away one by one. Paraguay refused Buenos Aires authority. Uruguay became the battleground of competing powers. Upper Peru, modern-day Bolivia, remained contested. The war was long, bloody, and shaped by as many internal divisions as external threats. A turning point came with the leadership of José de San Martín, the nation's most revered independence hero. In 1817, he led the epic crossing of the Andes, one of the most daring military maneuvers in world history, to liberate Chile, and later moved north to confront royalist forces in Peru. His victory at Battle of Maipú secured Chile's independence and cut off Spanish power in the south. Although the formal declaration of Argentine independence was issued earlier on July 9, 1816, at San Miguel de Tucumán, the fighting continued for years. Freedom from Spain was achieved, but a new question emerged. What kind of nation would Argentina become? The answer proved complicated. The new leaders split into two rival ideological camps. Unitarians, led by figures like Bernardino Rivadavia, wanted a strong centralized government in Buenos Aires, open trade with Europe, and a modern liberal state. Federalists, representing interior provinces, insisted on autonomy and resisted Buenos Aires domination. This foundational conflict, center versus provinces, elites versus regional interests, would shape Argentine politics for the next century. Even during independence, unity remained elusive, and divisions repeatedly erupted into violence. The country may have declared independence in 1816, but politically, Argentina was only beginning its long struggle to define itself. It would take decades of conflict, civil wars, and the rise of powerful caudillos before the nation found any semblance of stability.
Caudillos, civil wars, and the Age of Roses. The decades following independence were not years of consolidation or unity. Instead, they became a prolonged period of political fragmentation, regional rivalry, and the rise of powerful strongmen. The struggle between Unitarians and Federalists was not just ideological, it was geographic, economic, and deeply personal. Buenos Aires, with its wealthy port and cosmopolitan elite, clashed constantly with the rural interior provinces, which relied on cattle, landowners, and traditional regional identities. Into this turmoil emerged one of the most controversial figures in Argentine history, Juan Manuel de Rosas. Rosas was a wealthy rancher with deep connections to the estancias of the Pampas. He embodied the image of the caudillo, the Latin American strongman who commanded loyalty through charisma, patronage, and, when necessary, fear. As the fighting between Unitarians and Federalists escalated, Rosas rose to prominence by presenting himself as the only leader capable of restoring order. By 1829, he had become governor of Buenos Aires, and before long, he effectively dominated the entire confederation. For nearly 2 decades, Rosas ruled with an iron fist, concentrating power in his own hands and suppressing dissent with ruthless efficiency. One of his most feared tools was a paramilitary force known as La Mazorca, a violent political police that hunted down opposition members. La Mazorca became infamous for intimidation, torture, and assassinations. Their presence turned Rosas's rule into a climate of fear, a precursor to the state terror that would reappear in Argentina's darkest moments
later in the 20th century. Yet despite his brutality, Rosas also maintained support among rural populations and segments of the military. He championed traditional values and provincial autonomy, resisted European interference, and became a symbol of Federalist dominance. Under his leadership, the Federalists finally defeated the Unitarians, but at the cost of deepening long-term animosities. Still, enemies grew. Neighboring powers, especially Brazil and Uruguay, watched Rosas's expansionist ambitions with concern. Internal opponents, resentful of his authoritarianism, waited for an opportunity to strike. It finally came in 1852, when a coalition of regional leaders and foreign-backed forces united against him. Leading that coalition was Justo José de Urquiza, a former ally turned adversary. Urquiza's uprising culminated in the Battle of Caseros, where Rosas was defeated decisively. He fled into exile, living out the rest of his life in Southampton, far from the land he once ruled with absolute control. Rosas's fall marked a turning point. For the first time in decades, Argentina had the chance to build a political system not dominated by a single caudillo. Urquiza and other leaders sought to establish a constitutional order that could reconcile federal autonomy with national unity. Their efforts led to the drafting of the 1853 Constitution, heavily inspired by the United States Constitution. It introduced fundamental liberal principles, separation of powers, civil liberties, property rights, and federalism. The Constitution laid the groundwork for a more modern state that could aspire to long-term stability. But political harmony did not arrive overnight. Buenos Aires initially rejected the Constitution and seceded, forming its own breakaway state. Only after years of negotiation and conflict did it rejoin the nation in 1862 under a unified government. Still, the seeds for political modernization had been planted. In the decades ahead, Argentina would enter a new era, one of extraordinary economic growth, massive immigration, and a governing elite determined to project stability, progress, and European-style modernity. Yet beneath that prosperity, the old tensions never fully disappeared. And as the country transformed, new social forces would emerge and challenge the established order in ways the oligarchy never anticipated.
The oligarchic republic and the promise of progress. With the defeat of Rosas and the establishment of the 1853 Constitution, Argentina embarked on one of the most transformative periods in its history. From the mid-19th century through the early 20th century, the nation experienced rapid economic expansion, territorial consolidation, and a political system dominated by a small but powerful elite. This era, often called the oligarchic republic, blended genuine progress with democratic limitations that would later haunt Argentine politics. Under leaders like Justo José de Urquiza, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, and Julio Argentino Roca, Argentina began constructing a modern nation-state. Railroads spread across the Pampas, connecting distant provinces to Buenos Aires. Telegraph lines, ports, public schools, and modern bureaucratic institutions emerged at an astonishing pace. Much of this progress was funded by foreign capital, especially investment from Great Britain, which financed railroads, refrigeration technology, and large-scale agricultural export infrastructure. British-owned trains carried Argentine beef and grain to ports, where ships transported these goods across the Atlantic. The country became a global breadbasket. Beef, wheat, corn, and wool poured out of its fertile lands, and wealth followed. Buenos Aires exploded into a cosmopolitan metropolis. Travelers compared it to Paris, impressed by its grand avenues, cafes, and European-style architecture. Huge waves of immigrants arrived, mostly from Italy and Spain, swelling the population and providing labor for expanding industries. But beneath the surface of progress,
Politics remained tightly controlled. Elections were routinely manipulated by the ruling elite, known as the Generation of 80, a circle of landowning families and political insiders who ran the country through patronage, negotiation, and sometimes outright fraud. Power rotated among a small set of leaders through agreements rather than open democratic competition. Their policies were guided by classical liberalism, free trade, property rights, limited government intervention, and a belief that European immigration would modernize Argentina's population. Yet their liberal principles did not extend to political participation. The vast majority of people, immigrants, workers, small farmers, had no real say in the political process. Under Roca's leadership, the government also expanded its territorial control. The most controversial chapter of this expansion was the conquest of the desert, a military campaign aimed at subduing and displacing indigenous populations in Patagonia. Led by Roca, the campaign resulted in the deaths of more than 1,000 indigenous people and the forced displacement of tens of thousands more. Their ancestral lands were then integrated into Argentina's growing agricultural economy, opening millions of hectares to cattle ranching and wheat production. For the oligarchy, this territorial conquest symbolized national consolidation and progress. But it also deepened long-term inequalities and left a legacy of violence and dispossession. As the 20th century approached, Argentina appeared to be on a trajectory toward becoming one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Its exports bloomed, cities thrived, and society became increasingly urban and diverse. By 1914, Buenos Aires ranked among the largest cities in the Western Hemisphere. But this rapid transformation created new political forces that the oligarchy could no longer ignore. The working class was growing, formed by millions of immigrants who brought with them ideas of socialism, anarchism, and union activism. A rising middle class of teachers, merchants, and professionals demanded political reform. Urbanization accelerated the spread of newspapers, ideas, and public debate. The pressure became too great. The old political system could not contain the new social realities. And so the era of controlled elections and oligarchic dominance was reaching its end. In 1912, Argentina introduced the Sáenz Peña law, establishing universal, secret, and mandatory male suffrage. For the first time, ordinary Argentines could vote freely. This single reform changed everything. New parties emerged, the political landscape opened, and the stage was set for the rise of mass politics. In 1916, the first truly democratic election brought the radical civic union to power, marking the beginning of a new era, one where political participation would expand dramatically, but where old tensions between the state, elites, workers, and the military would soon resurface with explosive consequences. Progress had transformed Argentina, but it had also created expectations, demands, and frustrations that the old system could not contain. The country was entering a new chapter, one that would see political mobilization, economic volatility, and eventually the emergence of one of the most influential political movements in Latin America.
The Return of Democracy and the Struggle for Stability, 1983 to present. By 1983, Argentina was exhausted by fear, censorship, disappearances, and the crushing humiliation of the Malvinas defeat. The dictatorship that once presented itself as the guardian of order had collapsed under its own brutality and mismanagement. And for the first time in years, Argentines were able to breathe the air of possibility again. That same year, they went to the polls in an election that would reshape the nation. Alfonsín and the Rebirth of Democracy. Raúl Alfonsín, a lawyer and longtime critic of the regime, became president with a mission unlike any before him: to rebuild democracy from the ruins of a terror state. His government immediately confronted the shadows of the dictatorship. The landmark trial of the juntas held top military leaders responsible for kidnapping, torture and murder, something almost unheard of in Latin America at the time. It was a bold move, and for a brief moment, Argentina seemed to be turning a page, facing its past and building a more transparent future. But democracy alone could not solve everything. The economy was in chaos, external debt soaring, inflation spiraling out of control, and strikes erupting across the country. Alfonsin's government struggled to impose stability, and by 1989, hyperinflation forced him to hand over power early. Menem and the neoliberal turn. Then came Carlos Menem, charismatic, confident, and promising order. His presidency in the 1990s took Argentina in a radically different direction. Menem introduced sweeping neoliberal reforms, privatizing state companies, opening the economy, and pegging the peso to the US dollar. For a while it worked. Inflation evaporated, foreign investment surged, shopping malls and international brands flooded Buenos Aires. Argentina looked modern and stable again. But beneath the surface, the model was fragile. Debt skyrocketed, industry weakened, unemployment rose. The apparent stability was purchased on borrowed money and borrowed time. And when the global winds shifted, Argentina was left dangerously exposed. The 2001 collapse. Que se vayan todos. The crisis hit like an earthquake. By late 2001, Argentina defaulted on its debt, the largest sovereign default in world history at the time. Banks froze accounts, poverty exploded, protests filled the streets. Amid the chaos, presidents resigned one after another, some lasting mere days. In a single moment, Argentina's faith in its political system shattered. People shouted a phrase that perfectly captured the mood of the country. Que se vayan todos, which means they all must go. The Kirchner era, populism, recovery, and polarization. Out of the ashes emerged Néstor Kirchner in 2003, followed by his wife Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. Together, they oversaw a period of economic recovery, renegotiating debt, strengthening social programs, and benefiting from a global boom in commodity prices. Poverty fell, the middle class expanded again. But the Kirchners also became controversial, accused of expanding state control, deepening ideological divides, and centralizing power. For their supporters, they were champions of sovereignty and social justice. For their critics, they were architects of corruption and authoritarian tendencies. Kirchnerismo became and remains one of the most powerful and polarizing forces in modern Argentinian politics. Recent years. New faces, old problems. After Cristina, Argentina cycled through new political experiments. Mauricio Macri tried to liberalize the economy but struggled with debt and inflation. Alberto Fernández brought Kirchnerismo back, but the pandemic and economic pressures deepened financial instability. Today, Argentina continues facing the same recurring challenges: inflation, political polarization, currency crises, and battles over the country's direction. And yet, despite everything, despite dictatorships, economic disasters, and endless political battles, democracy has survived. Argentines continue voting, protesting, debating, and pushing their leaders to do better. It is a nation that refuses to give up on itself. Because Argentina's political history is not just a story of crisis, it is also a story of survival, of reinvention, of a people who endure, adapt, and always find a way forward no matter how turbulent the road becomes.
Argentina's persistent political drama. Argentina's political history is a story of extremes. It is a story of ambition, courage, and creativity, but also of division, violence, and economic fragility. From the early patriots of 1810 to the leaders of today, the nation has repeatedly struggled to balance competing visions of power: centralized authority versus provincial autonomy, elite privilege versus popular participation, economic liberalism versus social welfare. The nation's cycles of boom and bust, dictatorship and democracy, populism and neoliberalism are not just economic patterns, they are deeply political. Each crisis leaves scars, and each recovery reshapes the country in unpredictable ways. Yet, Argentina also shows resilience that is remarkable. The mothers who protested in the Plaza de Mayo, the workers who forced Juan Perón into the political arena, the citizens who restored democracy after years of military rule, these are all examples of a society unwilling to surrender to fear or injustice. Political life in Argentina is never static. It is always contested, vibrant, and deeply personal. Today, Argentina faces familiar challenges: inflation, debt, social inequality, and political polarization. But it also carries the lessons of history, that institutions matter, that popular movements can transform society, and that leadership, for better or worse, shapes the fate of the nation. In the end, understanding Argentina's political history is not just about knowing dates, coups, or presidents. It is about seeing the patterns that define a nation: the struggles for power, the push for justice, and the tension between ideals and reality. It is about recognizing a country that, despite its turmoil, continues to inspire, to hope, and to fight for a better future. Argentina remains, in every sense, a work in progress. Its past may be turbulent, but its story is far from over. And as history has shown, the people of Argentina are always ready to write the next chapter, one that balances lessons learned with the enduring spirit of a nation determined to define its own destiny.